face. We face the place that we wanna go. Or we fear, we never grow. How will we learn? How can tell you? How do you correct yourself when you don't? Who do you know? And what do you know? How do I know? Who to know? And how do I go?
It's
And
not
where?
because
How and
of
why?
you, so don't take it personally.
Why?
Face. We face the place that we wanna go. Or we fear, we never grow. How will we learn? How we can tell you? How do who can correct yourself when you don't? Who do you know? And what do you know? How do I know? Who to know? And how do I go? And where? How and why? Why do I need to go?
The lady got problems.
Face. We face the place that we wanna go. Or we fear, we never grow. How will we learn? How we can tell you?
Never know.
How do who can correct yourself when you don't? Who do you know? And what do you know? How do I know? Who to know? And how do I go? And where? How and why? Why do I need to
Sometimes I
go?
record just to hear what it's gonna sound like.
Why aren't we asking why? Who is that later and why is it so mysterious in deep vows? Maybe will sometimes put you with some A-E-I-O-U-Y conundrum. This is the places when your perspective is not your only objective. There's
It's not because of you, so don't
another
take it
dimension.
You know,
Face.
She walked into our house. She got mad.
as
Face.
soon as she walked in.
Face. We face the place that we wanna go. We fear, we never grow. How will we learn? How will we tell you? Known for the statement, known for the path, known for the art, known for being a thinker, prominent for the public life, and you could be important.
You never know.
Who's conservative?
Just had a
Who's the discoveration of what's formulated for you to be a mechanic in terms of your matrice? Who's the prize and who's the giver of the method for the description is only philosophy?
just to hear what it's gonna
Whose attempt to gain for the character to strict the science as it may be, for the language of the work, for the made and significance of your
But no, to give your mind
categorizing or the category, for the influence of your classical story, for the lasting of the importance,
it can be something
which
that
holds
they
that
say
reality
about.
for consisting of the mind for their ideas or everything,
That you don't know about.
or maybe it was a noun,
It's
for
by
the speaking of you, for the writing of the providing of the clearest view for the development,
I'm just giving you perspective. That's just
Or-
one example. Yeah, but don't take it
to
personally.
the contribution noted for what was particularly influential for your future.
Like, well, something's wrong about it.
I am not the elders.
That's not good. I don't like something about,
Well, who's to assimilate for the orientation of the spiritual tradition? How do we know who's enlightened? The subject for the man's direct concern with his own existence and later work to reaction of being. Not for the forerunner for the cultural state of mind, for the he attempted to find especially a major work for the integrity,
I guess that would.
the integrating for your similarities, or the stimulator for the religious, or maybe the revival known for the spiritual. One of the forerunners for the age of protesting. Whose theories? Whose anticipated modern science? Whose infinite universe and the multiplicity? Is it you? Or is it I? Is it you and I in one verse? Is it the principles that work for the age of enlightenment? Was it that son? Was it that philosopher? Was it that scholastic? And maybe theologian? Maybe the classical defense for your doctrine? Was it the mother or the Jesus? Or was it conceived without the mother? Or maybe maybe the Mother Canaan communism for those who be the angels of lost in Los Angeles? And one immediate word is God, maybe the soon after that to be the death. Who's devoted? Who's following?
How long you gonna not go to
Who's regarded by your modern technology?
Can I start on Tuesday?
Who's perhaps the most important self for the poet to understand things?
Martin Luther King birthday?
Why are we enabled?
Martin Luther King, though, right?
Who enables the addition of your satisfying yourself or being ignorant? Who's taking things literal? Who's littering? Who's reading the literature? Who's the movement? Who's the innovator? Who's history and culture? Who projected the static and values and the favor and the values of the motion for the change or the evolution for the you was also the master?
Known for the statement, known for the path, known for the art, known for being a thinker, prominent for the public life, and you could be important. Who's conservative? Who's the discoveration of what's formulated for you to be a mechanic in terms of your matrice? Who's the prize and who's the giver of the method for the description is only philosophy? Whose attempt to gain for the character to strict the science as it may be, for the language of the work, for the made and significance of your categorizing your the category for the influence of your classical story for the lasting of importance, which holds that reality for consisting of the mind for their ideas or everything. Or maybe it was a noun, or the speaking of you for the writing and the providing of the clearest view for the development, or
Are we going to your house?
to the contribution noted for what was particularly influential for your future.
Come back and then
I am not the eldest,
pull up to a damn park.
or who's to assimilate for the orientation of the spiritual tradition.
Parking lot.
How do we know who's enlightened? The subject for the man's direct concern with his own existence and later work to reaction of being.
Okay.
Not for the forerunner for the cultural state of mind, for the he attempted to find especially a major work for the integrity,
Yeah, well,
the integrating for your similarities, or the stimulator for the religious, or maybe the revival known for the spiritual, one of the forerunners for the age.
I kept on calling her onto my room. She said no.
Known for the statement, known for the path, known for the art, known for being a thinker, prominent for the public life, and you could be important. Who's conservative? Who's the discoveration of what's formulated for you to be a mechanic in terms of your matrices? Who's the prize and who's the giver of the method for the description is only philosophy? Whose attempt to gain for the character the strict the science as it may be, for the language of the work, for the made and significance of your categorizing your the category, for the influence of your classical story, for the lasting of importance, which holds that reality for consisting of the mind for their ideas or everything. Or maybe it was a noun, or the speaking of you for the writing and the providing of the clearest view for the development, or is to the contribution noted for what was particularly influential for your future. I am not the eldest, or who's to assimilate for the orientation of the spiritual tradition. How do we know who's enlightened? The subject for the man's direct concern with his own existence and later work to reaction of being. Not for the forerunner for the cultural state of mind, for the he attempted to find especially a major work for the integrity, the integrating for your similarities, or the stimulator for the religious, or maybe the revival known for the spiritual, one of the forerunners for the age of protesting. Whose theories, whose anticipated modern science, whose infinite universe and the multiplicity. Is it you, or is it I? Is there you and I in one verse? Is it the principles that work for the age of enlightenment? Was it that sun? Was it that philosopher? Was it that scholastic? And maybe a theologian? Maybe the classical defense for your doctrine? Was it the mother of the Jesus? Or was it conceived without the mother? Or maybe the mother communism for those who could be the angels of lost in Los Angeles? And one immediate word is God, maybe the soon after that, the deed of death? Who's devoted? Who's following? Who's regarded by your modern technology? Who's perhaps the most important self for the pope to understand things? Why are we enabling? Who enabled the addition of your satisfying self or being ignorant? Who's taking things literal? Who's littering? Who's reading the literature? Who's the movement? Who's the innovator? Who's history and culture? Who projected the static values and the favor and the values of the motion for the change or the evolution for the you was also the master? Finding myself as a philosopher only get chief in my framework, considerable as a reputation for the contributor, contribute, illuminating, eliminating, together myself with the rounds of all traditional, not for the book or the mouth or the understanding of you, for the interpretation of maybe the advances of the liberal, or the political that combine your thought with the experimental and in chemistry. It's best to remember, for I cannot forget, for the simple act, for the systemization for what's work, undertaken by your confused, giving yourself cohesive, cognitive ways of learning and achieving your influence, advocating for the prominence is over the individual act and thought. That calling to the reaction against what the exponent for the metaphysical, maybe the primary and important, the pessimistic, the freedom of the individual for the human being, not to be an exponent, but explain. The pioneer in the functional ways of the leaders, progressive as I can define as some knowledge to the thought and the dominated ways of your middle age and recognize yourself highly, not stoned, but in the Stone Age prevalent, subject to systems I am not aware of, but eager to know. Will say yes. What's that's critical? The conditioning of the society for the contributions and the logic was needed, the analysis for the language and maybe the theory, the probability for the philosophy, the science, the mathematicians, the alchemists, the esoteric and the idea of that Holy Spirit. Maybe the influence of this investigation may be inside of me. Not to be a short story, but me to be the writer. Combine yourself.